That's okay. There's a public meeting in public. Are we ready? Thank you. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Corporate Parenting Committee. Just to be clear, this meeting is a meeting held in public and it is being recorded. I won't go through the whole filming wording, but just to point out the rules that apply when we are having a meeting in public. So, do we have any apologies for absence?
No apologies have been received, Chair.
I have received an apology from Councillor Collette, who had a last-minute emergency in her arrangements, so was not able to come tonight.
Councillor Brabazon, can we record apologies from Anne Graham, the DCS? She was called away on another matter.
Thank you. Thanks, Bev. We have any urgent business?
None.
Any declarations of interest? No? Minutes, pages 1 to 4. Does anybody want to raise any either matters of factual matters arising or any corrections?
It's a matters arising just about the corporate parenting champions. Just wondered if there was any update on how things are going with the development of that.
Sorry, I didn't hear that. Could you repeat that?
It was for an update on the corporate parenting champions that we discussed last time, just how things are going with setting that up.
I've actually asked that this be put on the agenda as any other business, if that's okay, that we have a full discussion there. Will that be okay? Right. Okay. Other than that, are there any other matters arising from the minutes anyone wants to raise? If not, can we agree the minutes? Marsha? Agreed?
Agreed. Thank you.
Right. So that would lead us to agenda item 6, and that is Richard is going to lead us on. I assume Richard will lead us on the performance report. I see he's just magically appeared on the screen.
Good evening.
Over to you, Richard.
Thank you. Right, so it's the normal quarterly update of performance reporting. We start with looking at the if we start with the overall report of the number of children in care, this has fallen over the last quarter to 378, which is a rate of 65, which is still in line with our statistical neighbours. But this week's update is this number is now 365 is today's update. The number in the report is 378. So 365 is getting now towards the bottom quartile of our statistical neighbours. So it is not unusually low yet, but it's getting towards the point where we will be keeping an eye on this number in case it drops much further. There's still 2 or 3 London boroughs considerably lower than us on this rate. The number of unaccompanied asylum seekers, which has been a big driver in this fall over the last couple of years now, the numbers has fallen, as we know, it's 42 or so before the pandemic. It's now 21. But recently there's a raise in the National Transfer Scheme threshold, whereby we're expected to accept young people from this scheme up to a total of now 60 young people. Previously it was 42. So they are starting to come through in the last few weeks now as a result of that and other things. As you can see from page 6 of the report, the churn of children coming out of care is remaining quiet and low. So it's just a general slow movement on this thing. One of the exceptions on this is the children aged under 3, where since the pandemic we had 49 children in care aged under 3, and as of this month it's gone up to 65. Obviously it fluctuates because it's quite a small cohort, but it is something that's been a change over the last couple of years. And another thing we've been watching closely over the last well, two or 3 years change, is now the family and acute stress as the now joint highest reason for children being in care. It's caught up with abuse and neglect, which has traditionally always been way above. Adoptions are fairly where we'd expect to be at halfway through the year. We've had 5 so far this year. We're hopeful for doubling that before the end of the year. In terms of up-to-date care plans, 84% of children an up-to-date care plan, 71% up-to-date pathway plan. The usual problems and complexities of getting these done. I'm sure Emma and Bev can talk at length about how complicated these things are to actually get done. But we can see the PEPs at the end of last term were very healthy. 93% of children had an up-to-date personal education plan. Visits are challenging at the moment. We've got 70% of children in care with an up-to-date visit as of the end of last month. As of today, that's gone up to 73%, so it is moving in the right direction. In terms of placement moves, 12% of children had 3 or more placement moves in the last 12 months. This still isn't very high, but it's higher than we have been traditionally. Normally, we've been much lower than the average on this, and now we're slightly above the average, but it has to be looked in tandem with the other stability indicator of being in the same placement for 2.5 years, 2 years, if you've been in placement, if you've been in care, sorry, for 2.5 years, staying in the same placement for 2 years. And this one, we're still performing better than average, with 74% of our children in that cohort having a stable placement throughout. Health assessments are good as normal. 96% odd, and dental checks stubbornly sticking around 63% at the moment. Always problematic, but happy to say again, all for Emma's service, 100% of our 19 to 20-year-olds are in touch. This is exceptionally high. Technically there's one child that isn't, but it rounds up to 100%, so we're happy to say it's 100% of them. And again, we've got here details, and I know Emma knows these children by individual names, the ones who aren't in EAT. It's 62% of our 19 to 21-year-olds are in education and employment, and 70% of 17 and 18-year-olds. Both in suitable accommodation, it's 90% of both cohorts, or over 90% of both cohorts, we know in suitable accommodation. So that's a quick fly through of the summary. There's any questions?
Hi, could I just raise a quick question?
Can I just say, Councillor Mahbub has joined us online.
Yeah, I've actually been joined the whole time, but yeah, yeah. Sorry, I raised my hand, but I think yeah, I think you might have missed it. I have 2 questions. So, in regards to 2.16, what is included in leaving care services? Like, what does that actually mean? What is included in that? And for 2.15, dental care services, why are they so low? Is there a services? Is there a reason for that?
Can I leave the first one for Emma to answer? Is that okay, Emma?
So in terms of 2.16, 434 care leavers, sorry, there is some echo, is our young people aged 18 to 25 that will be included in that cohort. We do have a number of care leavers who are over the age of 21, and the legislation is that they either need to have a significant need or and a wish to be in contact with services, to be in receipt of services.
I could interrupt you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I meant more the leaving care services. Like, what are the actual services that you mean from that? What are the services included in that? That's more my question.
I didn't hear. Could you repeat?
Okay, Emma, I'll start, Emma, and you can finish,
Okay.
I think, okay?
Yeah, sorry.
Leaving, it's when you've been in care for a certain period of time after your 16th birthday, you're entitled to leave and care services, and that is fundamentally you have a personal advisor allocated to you, and then we give you financial and moral support towards general living and stuff like that. That's a very rough summary.
So your PA
Yeah.
works to make sure that you're settled into your permanent accommodation, that you realise your aspiration in terms of your education, training or employment wishes, that you're supported to furnish your accommodation, that you're supported through your years at university, if that is your goal, that you're supported around your emotional well-being and mental health needs, that we work effectively with the multi-agency to ensure if you've got substance misuse challenges that you're connected to the right services, for example. Is that answering your question?
Yeah, that is. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other one was around dental checks and why it's so stubborn. I could be harsh and just say it's because teenagers don't like going to the dentist.
No.
But we'll pass over to Lynn.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. So I'm the designated nurse for children in care. Dental checks have been at similar levels really in the past, even prior to the pandemic. We were having difficulties with dental, number of young people having dental checks done. Then, of course, we had problems with people being unable to get the appointments during COVID. So as a designate network, we had escalated that to the Public Health and England, and within London now we've got the Healthy Smile programme. So if anybody can't get a dental appointment, we can get one for a young person in care, and that will usually within, if they need urgent dental treatment, they can have that very quickly. But if it's a routine checkup, then it may be waiting 2 to 4 weeks. But that doesn't help us for a lot of our young people who are placed out of London. And as we know, many of our children aren't within London. If we're notified, then we will ring the local looked after children's team and find out which dentists are taking children on. And then we can pass that back to the social worker or personal advisor to get young people seen. But we need to be, all of us need to be encouraging the young people to have the dental checks. As Richard said, lots of the older children are refusing to go, which is an issue. We're with our neighbours. Yeah.
Come in.
Yeah, I think, Councillor, because it's difficult to hear. I think the issues might be if someone's got the red on their mic in the room, it creates an echo. So could you just experiment with me? We turn the mics off and see if that reduces the echo. I think my thesis is right.
Better. Is that better?
Yeah. If the mic's on and we're speaking, turn it off. We won't have an echo.
We were all having. They set this room up. Maybe we can adapt it a bit better. But any other questions for Richard? Ellen?
Thanks, Richard. You'll be relieved that they're not actually questions for you. They're questions arising from your report. My first, I think, is probably Bev. On the family and acute stress point, I can understand why this has increased, and it strikes me that potentially these are circumstances that might be experienced by a tremendous number of families in the coming weeks and months. So what's the approach to these families? Are the families where the children end up in care where early help hasn't worked? What kind of services do we offer, or how are we? Sorry, I know this is a bunch of questions, but really it's how are we configuring our services if we know this is an increasing pressure to support those families to reduce the number of children who come into care? And then do you want to come back on that one? Then I've got a second question, which is slightly separate.
Thanks, Councillor Weston. Councillor Weston, I want to just start off by just setting out that we have been tracking and working with our Jackie and the team from Early Help. For the last 9 months, we do know that when cases escalate, it's because and it's from Early Help, it's because they've exhausted the intensive efforts that Early Help put into the whole family in line with our family approach. And so there has been no dispute around the threshold decision for children and their families that when they come into safeguarding. And sadly, when we track the cases through CIN, CP and threshold for court, I, in the last year, have not presented any cases that have gone to the court where the threshold has not been satisfied. And so for families in acute stress, there is more work, however, at universal services and earlier intervention, particularly when the predominant reason for families being in acute stress is around mental health support needs, and the wider societal impact that post-COVID is having on parents, particularly where mental health was a little fragile before, but is aggravated for a number and a range of factors. So there is work that through the DCS that has happened with our colleagues from the CCG to attract greater funding, to strengthen our position in terms of with health's intervention. We're working on what's called the multidisciplinary team model with our primary care GPs to just pick needs up a little sooner. That's really started to settle down, but it's not yet, in my opinion, embedded. And we are changing the approach at our front door to assessing and intervening when around acute stress. We would never issue proceedings or allow a child to come into care because the family is suffering financial hardship. Our Section 17 duty would kick in. It really has got to be risks and harm that cannot be remedied.
Thanks, Bev. I suppose the difficulty is that when families come under that level of financial stress, then that itself impacts on mental health and so on, doesn't it? It's so hard. But thanks for that answer. My second question was about, it's paragraph 2.10, and it is in relation to the pathway plans. I can understand complexity and conflicting priorities of children and young people, but I wondered if it might be you, Bev, it might be somebody else, could just explain the conflicting and challenging priorities of the frontline practitioners.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start and then I'll invite Emma to provide some more kind of operational examples. So, Councillor Bravazone, during COVID, many of our social workers, PAs, were the only resource standing for our young people, and that has taken its toll. So after the last time we were here, we went away and looked at our strategy, and we have started to redesign the way that we want to address the issue. But there is a real challenge, particularly in our young adult service, around the numbers of care leavers who are presenting with undiagnosed mental health support needs, both within the borough and external to the borough. So that's not this is experience of the stress that families experience. It's not isolated to families. We're starting to see that with our care leavers. And that does mean when there isn't another agency to support them, that a lot of the pressure is on the young adult service, the PAs and the social workers to advocate and to intervene. Emma, do you want to give some more specifics?
I think, Bev, you've answered that really, really well. And it is a lot of transitional safeguarding that is happening in the service currently. In terms of our pathway plans, though, we are meeting our target of 80% in young adults. We're at 84 at the moment, and we are tracking this on a fortnightly basis to make sure that we maintain that. But in terms of the workload, it is particularly difficult around a risk. We've got an increasing number of young people where contextual safeguarding is also a concern in the service, and trying to make sure that the safeguards are in place, and that's our priority. Hayley, I don't know whether you want to talk a little bit about children in care and where you're at with the pathway plans as well.
Yeah, so I think the competing priorities are the same. What I would say is that we've had quite a lot of movement this summer, and we've got more stable teams, and there's some catching up to do over the summer. We also seem to have had quite a high number of people turn 16 recently, and we are now getting to a position where we are planning at 15.5 much better as a service. So we should get into a position in the next couple of months where we don't have anybody without a pathway plan.
Any further questions? Krista?
Yeah, I was just wondering what does happen, or what is in place for someone who's 25, who's just leaving the leaving care team, but is showing up some mental health vulnerabilities. Because I'm thinking back on what our young person said earlier about not being able to contact their PA anymore. And I was wondering what the safety net is like for those young people. Thank you.
So we would work really hard. Sorry, there's an echo. But as young people are reaching their age of 25, we're working really hard to make sure that if those concerns are emerging, that they've been referred to Adult Services for a Care Act assessment. And to adult mental health. We'd also be working with the GP to think about what can be put in place, you know, in terms of community resources as well as medication potentially. There is floating support available to support young people in their own accommodation. So we'd be reaching out to floating support, and connected communities would be another port of call. And there is the Adults Vulnerable panel that we can also present our young people to, that is attended by more adult agencies, if that makes sense, and seek their guidance and support in terms of ongoing, more community-based support for those young adults. But it is very challenging. We also have a contract with Mind in Haringey, and where they will provide therapy virtually or in person, depending if the young adult lives in the borough. So it depends on what course of action is best. And obviously we'd be listening to the young adult themselves around what help and support they feel that they need and what they might engage with and would find helpful ongoing. And we always pick up the phone to anyone over the age of 25, even after we've closed their case, to offer them some additional signposting and guidance. We'd never turn anyone away. But maybe I'll hand over to Bev at this point.
I mean, Councillor Brabazon, I know that you were present at the Transitional Safeguarding Conference and the launch of our new protocol and our approach. And it might be helpful, I mean, that we come back and have a longer dialogue about it. But essentially, the locality model that's been led by our adult team has adopted the Transitional Safeguarding protocol and policy. And that will mean that there are about 6 agencies, and they're large agencies in the borough, and mechanisms that will ensure any young person who's achieving their 25th birthday, but we still feel need a period of holding and supporting, that we have avenues to take the need to be addressed. And as Emma said earlier, we start to identify them in the year leading up to their 25th birthday and do some intensive conversations with them around accepting that support, because that's the issue, and through the influence of the PA largely, to start to hand them over to other provision if they're in borough. Our challenge is if they don't live in the borough. And other local authorities don't have transitional safeguarding approaches in place. That's my little worry.
Thank you. Do you have any more questions, Krista? Marsha, any questions before? Ahmed?
None from me.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions. One is about on para 2.4, which I think Ellen might have been referencing. It really is how many of the children are under care orders or some of which are voluntarily placed in care. Do we know the figures? But you know, families where there's like a voluntary agreement under Section 20 or where we've had to go to court.
I don't know off the top of my head, but I can tell you within 5 minutes.
The reason I'm asking is if there's a voluntary care agreement, whether, you know, working with the families to get children back and all the rest of it, and kinship, all that aspect, because children are so young, and what, given the fact the numbers have gone up and families are in acute stress, I'm really interested to know how that breaks down and then how it affects care planning. But Bev, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I think Councillor Brabazon, that's a really helpful question, and I think we should send you what the data tells us. But and I think that it's, as ever with these things, it's not so straightforward. So we have to take off the unaccompanied asylum seekers. We then need to take off the children who are Section 20 by court agreement, if you like, pending the outcome where the PLO didn't. The public law outline process didn't kick in enough time. So there's a cohort that we need to strip out, and then I think you'll find that we have a handful in the category that you've just described, not large numbers at all for Haringey.
That's an incredibly helpful answer, because when you look at this as raw data, it doesn't really tell us underneath what's going on. But once you start getting a bit more nuanced, and you said about people in voluntary arrangements, it gives you a completely different slant on what the issues might be. And so that is what I wanted to ask. And the other question is about, it's in paragraph, hang on, sorry, it's about the young people of 17 moving into semi-independent accommodation. That all worries me, young people. I'd just like to know a bit more about what that might look like for them. They are, very young, aren't they?
Yeah, so Councillor Brabazon, we have 8 children who are currently in semi-independent units, 16 years and older. And so there's a breakdown I can provide to you and to the board. But out of the 8, only 2 are not meaningfully engaged in their education, and all of them, of course, are looked after. But we have 4 that are 2 are working, 2 are in education and further in their education, and you would have heard Wisdom talk about I'm living on my own now. Whilst he's not on his own in a semi-independent, he is on his own, but he came from that type of background. And I think that the 2 that we're keeping an eye on are actually, we share that responsibility with the courts, where there is a deprivation of liberty in place because they have needed an enhanced period of wanting to be contained because they're not yet making the right decisions about the risks they face in the community. So our numbers are low of school age in semi-independent, and long may that reign.
Very helpful, thank you. I haven't got any more questions, so I'll do one more round again on the panel, on the committee. Has anybody got, Richard?
So, yeah, I just found out there's 3 children under 3 who are currently looked after under Section 20 out of the 45.
Say 3?
Yeah, 3.
I'm sorry.
So out of the children aged under 3 who are looked after under Section 20, there's only 3 of them.
And the rest are in
Most
care?
of them are on interim care orders.
Raises even more questions. But we'll leave that there for now. Any more questions on Richard's report?
It's just a comment going back to my question about paragraph 2.10. I know this is data, but that point about conflicting and challenging priorities, I think, is so important to an understanding of where we are. And I just wonder if in future it might be helpful just to give 1 or 2 sentences explaining that stuff, because this is a public document, and I think if members of the public are reading this and not watching this meeting, they wouldn't know what that meant, and they might assume it meant something different. And actually there's a really complex and important story under there, which we've heard tonight really, really clearly and well explained. And I think it's useful to have on the public record the kinds of challenges that not just our young people, but the service is facing. So it's just a little bit of context sometimes could be really useful.
Happy to take that forward. Happy to take that forward.
Can I thank you, Richard, for giving the report and for the officers for contributing and clarifying. And I'm going to move us on to agenda item 7, and we've got a guest this evening. Can I welcome Lydia, who is from Adoption London North, who's going to present their annual report. For the just for the newer members of our committee, Adoption now is not run by Haringey directly. North London boroughs have been consolidated and brought together in Adoption London North. So Lydia, I think you run it, and so over to you to give us your annual report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me, and please stop me if you've got any questions on the way. I was planning to just whiz through the highlights of the report and then have any conversation that you would like to have. Yes, we now work together as 6 boroughs in North London since October 2019, and we're hosted in Islington, but deliver across the area. And we have 3 main areas of responsibility. That's for the recruitment and assessment of adoptive parents, family finding for children in need of adoptive families, and providing adoption support to families and adopted adults and others impacted by adoption in our area. The local authority, Haringey, maintain responsibility for the children in care and for the care planning that we do in partnership together. So on page 7 of my report, I've just given a breakdown of the spending last year, and we have 86% of our costs go on staffing costs. So obviously the majority going into that service delivery. And I also just wanted to mention on page 8 that we're part of a larger partnership called Adopt London, which I'll refer to later. This is 4 regional agencies across London, now covering 24 local authorities. And that's been really important in some of the development work that we've been able to do recently. Just moving on to page 10, part of our responsibilities are to have one adoption panel who make recommendations about the approval of prospective adopters, best interest decisions for relinquished babies, and matching decisions for the choice of an adoptive family for a child. So the recommendations will be made in that one panel that we have, and then the decision for a matching decision for a child will go to the agency decision maker in the borough, in this case Bev. In that way we are able to have some really good consistency across the area, learning from practice across the borough, and also good scrutiny of the work that we do as an agency. And we've included some feedback from the report from the Independent Adoption Panel Chair on page 11. So moving on to page 12, I'll just talk a little bit about recruiting prospective adopters. And it's really important for us that we are able to recruit the type of adoptive parents that we need for the children that we have needing families in our area. Adopt London's been really helpful in having this, because we now have sort of one brand as such, one face to the public, and anybody in London looking to adopt will find us whether they want to or not online, and have that choice between coming to us or coming maybe to a voluntary adoption agency, whereas previously we would have been 24 individual front doors and a very sort of confusing picture about who you choose. So that's been really, really powerful in making sure that we're talking to people, making sure that we're communicating to people that might be interested in adoption. And I've given some statistics there about our social media and our website, which are a really important part of that. Last year, on page 13, we developed a video, and this is part of, I've put the link in the digital version of the report. This is part of our sort of strategy as such to reach as many people as possible, to really communicate what adoption in London really is, talking about older children, children who have strengths and difficulties, who are complex, rather than maybe the image of adoption as sort of little baby who can be taken home that some people think of before they look into it. So do have a look at the video when you get a chance. On page 14, we've also been reaching out through working with partners on things like podcasts. And we find that a lot of prospective adopters, as you would imagine, they start the journey making initial inquiries, and it can take a really, really long time before they're actually ready to start the adoption process. They might have to make changes to their family arrangements, their home, their work arrangements. And so part of our job is to try to keep them growing, keep educating them, and keep them in touch with us throughout that process so they come back when they're ready to go. And the podcasts have been really helpful at doing that. So I've put some links there if you're interested in knowing more about that. They've been really helpful. On page 15, one of the successes coming out of the pandemic has actually been the development of virtual information sessions and what we call Meet the Adopter sessions. This has been a really easy way for us to run regular sessions for the public. And have been really well received by people who can sort of sit down and have their dinner in the evening and tune in to hear more about adoption. And the Meet the Adopter sessions particularly has meant that we can have 3 or 4 adoptive parents come and join us for the evening, and we throw open the floor. They can ask anything, members of the public can ask anything they like of the adopters. And we've had fantastic feedback at how that's really helped them prepare for adoption. Moving on to page 16, I've just, and 16 and 17, given you some information about the numbers of people coming forward to adopt, and also some figures comparing that to the previous year. So we've had an increase in people making an initial inquiry, looking at the yellow diagram on page 17, and also an increase in those signing up to attend information sessions. Almost the same, 2 people less actually attending an information session. And we have noticed that with virtual sessions, there is generally a little bit lower level of commitment to attending. Things can change at the last minute for people. A slightly higher number of people submitting an expression of interest, which means that they want us to be their adoption agency going forward. And a drop in the last year in terms of people starting stage 1. Now, we think that the drop in part reflects some of the complexities that we're seeing in people's lives as a result of the pandemic. So we're talking to a lot of people who want to adopt, who will be really good at adopting, but who need maybe quite a lot more time to really be ready. And we're seeing that as they go through the process as well. Maybe they've had a bereavement or an illness, or they've moved house unexpectedly or lost a job. And we've also had people who have maybe stopped infertility treatment unexpectedly early as well. And that's having an effect on how quickly we can start the assessment with them. So I'll go on to refer to that a little bit more later. On page 18 and 19, I've spoken about the approval process once we take people into the formal part of the process. Last year we had, in terms of 2020-21, we had particularly low number of approvals during the pandemic. That last year, 21-22, that has gone back up to 24 approvals. But we want to see that continuing to grow, and part of that challenge is around making sure that we have the capacity in our service to work with people over sometimes a longer period of time with more complexities to make sure that we can do that. We have very good feedback from the adoption panel in terms of the quality of the assessments of a very high standard, and most of the adopters go on to be matched with children very quickly after approval. At the bottom of page 19, one of our targets is to try to increase the number of Black and mixed Black ethnicity adopters that we approve. This is a really important aim for us because we have a large proportion in North London of children of Black and mixed Black ethnicity, and we want to be able to ensure that they're placed for adoption as quickly as every other child, and also that we have choice about where we place them in the same way that we do for other children. So on page 20, I've showed the data in terms of the number approved from different ethnic backgrounds, and I've put these into broad categories so that we can more easily compare to the number of children in those categories as well. And you'll see there that there was a slight drop from 25% to 21% of households from that background, but that did also represent an increase in terms of numbers because the overall numbers increased so much. We also saw an increase in the number of prospective adopters from Asian and Asian mixed backgrounds, although we have very low numbers of children that we need to place from those backgrounds. On page 21, I've given you a little bit of information about the Black Adoption Project. And this is one of the other things that has been really helpful about being in a larger partnership in Adopt London, that we've been able to start trying to tackle some of the bigger, more long-standing difficulties by working together. And Anne Graham, your DCS, is involved in chairing this project for us, for which we're very grateful. We're working in partnership with a consultant to try to look long term at the barriers to adoption for Black families and the reasons why our Black children wait longer to be placed with adoptive families. In the past, there have been lots of approaches that have tried to tackle this, but they've been very short term in nature. So we're basing this in research. We've undertaken steering groups and questionnaires, and we're taking a long-term research-based approach to trying to change this, and look forward to being able to update you more about that as we see some outcomes. Moving on to page 22, this is the other part of our role, which is planning for children who need adoption. And I've given some data in terms of the number of referrals. The arrangements that we have in place are that we will have a lead family finder from Adopt London North who works with your children in care service to plan for children from the earliest stages. And where an adoption care plan is likely, we get more involved in terms of getting to know the child and foster carer and starting to look for potential families for them. The referral levels just give you an indication in terms of the ups and downs that we see, which do vary significantly quarter by quarter. Moving on to page 23, overall this year there have been 45% fewer care plans for adoption formalised across North London by the agency decision maker, and 43% fewer placement orders. This is across the whole of North London. So although our numbers of children that have been placed has remained high and was higher last year, the parts of the process that are earlier on, making the decision and getting the placement order by the court, have both dropped recently. Now, there are a few different things that will be affecting this. One of them is that there are still lots of delays and lags in court processes from the pandemic. And so we don't yet know exactly how this is going to roll out over the next year. We don't know whether this is going to be a dip and it's going to rise again, or whether things are going to continue to decline. But it's something certainly that we're watching and that the governance board is watching closely to understand. Moving on to page 24, I've spoken a little bit about the approaches that our family finding team take to identify families for children, and one of the things that has been helpful in terms of being a regional agency has been the greater resources to do things like running soft play mornings and networking meetings ourselves. The soft play mornings are sessions where we usually use the children's centre, and we invite the foster carers and the children to come and meet some prospective adopters in a really low-key environment without sort of too much stress involved. And they've been really, really helpful at starting to form some different types of links that might do otherwise in a digital environment. On page 25, I've spoken about the number of in-house placements, and it's important for us to try to increase in-house placements as much as possible. When we all worked in separate boroughs, it was very hard to place children in-house because we have small geographical areas and small pools. But now that we're a bigger agency, we can do that much more effectively. So in 2020-21, we placed 25% of children in-house, and that increased, 29%, and that increased to 43% of children last year. And actually, last year, none of our adopters that we approved were matched with children from elsewhere. So we're really trying to work on improving their commitment to our children as well, right the way through the process. The in-house placements really help us to provide better support, to provide better transition planning, and to deal with any issues that arise in the process. On page 26, we have just recently started looking at the number of children that are placed in London and the South East. Again, this is around being able to provide better support. And I haven't got comparative measures for that reason, but last year over 80% of the children were placed in London and the South East, and that's something that we're hoping to maintain. On page 27, I've got some information about the number of children who we were actively family finding for at the end of March this year. And that's gone down significantly from 37 children the year before to 9 last year. Part of that reason is the drop in new placement orders over that period, and part of that reason is because we had far more placements made also during that period. So if you look at the bottom of that page, the previous year 31 placements were made, and last year that was 49, which is why that number has gone down significantly. We've also been embedding the Moving to Adoption Transition model, which is a research model from the University of East Anglia, which has been very well supported by our adopters and foster carers. It allows a much greater transition period for children and a much greater period of involvement by the foster carer after they move, which has been really positive. Moving on to page 28, there's some information there in terms of the number of matches by borough, and you'll see there the number of matches from Haringey. Again, in the 2020-21 year, all of the boroughs had low numbers of placements, and you had 6. In the 21-22 year, that increased to 13, and you can see the comparisons there. So it's we're one of the higher numbers of placements across North London. In terms of the characteristics of children that we placed for adoption, 20% of the children were in sibling groups, and they were all in sibling groups of 2. That compares to 30% in the previous year. The majority of children matched were under 2 years of age. Some of these children had come through early permanence placements, including some of the Haringey children, and were placed as young as 1 week old. And this means that the adoptive carers can act as their foster carers whilst the care proceedings go on, and can become their adopters when a placement order is granted. And there's been a few cases actually in Haringey where this has been particularly successful, where we saw really long delays in care proceedings in court. But because those children were in early permanence placements, they didn't experience any delay or move, and ultimately went on to have an adoption care plan. On page 30, I've spoken about the ethnicities of children As you see, the vast majority of our children fall within the black and black mixed ethnicity or white ethnicity categories. We have very few children who are from an Asian background, and this is why it's so important for us to increase the number of carers that can consider those placements. On page 31, I've outlined information about the support part of our service, and if I just move over to page 32, we've started to collect some data to be able to show you the different types of services that we are currently providing and the types of support required. One of the things that's been most notable for us is the very significant increase in families and young people who are experiencing acute need as a result of particularly post the second national lockdown in the pandemic. And who are really struggling to get CAMHS support and other specialist NHS services, and so are coming to us as their only source of support. And this means that more and more we're providing sort of quite a high acute level of support, with a number of our families also working with children's services through maybe CIN or early help services as well. A big part of our adoption support service, moving on to page 33, is access to the Adoption Support Fund, which is a central government fund to provide therapeutic support for adoptive families. Families come to us for an assessment of need. We identify a therapeutic provider and we provide the funding for that service. And this gives an indication of the level of need and demand generally for support. So last year that increased by 24%. Both in terms of the number of applications and the value of those. We also run some really successful groups that we want to focus this year on expanding. The Parents of Adopted Teenagers group is co-facilitated by a therapist, and the parents meet together monthly for a Saturday morning and talk about the difficulties that their adopted young people are facing. And this has been helpful in preventing those families from experiencing burnout and maybe feeling that the children can't live with them anymore, and preventing crisis. We have a partnership with a peer adoption support agency across London called We Are Family. They have over 1,000 adoptive parents as members in London, and through them we've been able to, in a very cost-effective way, deliver things like online specialist webinars and meetups. And just onto the last page, page 34, I've outlined some of the recommendations and targets that we aim for the next year, and I think I've mentioned most of those as we've gone through the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was a really comprehensive and helpful run through what I think is an absolutely excellent report.
Thank you.
And on behalf of the committee, I think I'll speak for everyone. But I'm going to open it for questions. Has anybody, Krista or Ellen, got questions?
Okay, hi. It's a comment really more than a question, because I think you answered it towards the end, because I was thinking about if there was anything more that could be done to do some joint work with CAMHS in terms of getting these young people prioritised, because obviously it's very high stakes, isn't it? Adoptive families are very high stakes, and so therefore the priority might be not so much clinical but actually sort of social, and about sort of early intervention to make sure that those placements don't break down. And I was wondering if there was in any way some more work that could be done to prioritise, or to get CAMHS to prioritise these children, really.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the difficulties that we have with CAMHS actually is that often our children, our young people, are seen as being low risk when they're assessed in crisis, because they have supportive and understanding parents, and they're seen as having stable home environments. So we have young people that are discharged from hospital after suicide attempts, without being seen, and sort of circumstances like that, which are very difficult. Some of the work, it is difficult. Obviously, the CAMHS environment is very complex at the moment, but we have a project that we're involved with across London to try to get some funding nationally to work on improved pathways and having much clearer areas of responsibility for what should be an adoption support responsibility and what should be something that immediately is seen by CAMS. And we're hoping that through that we'll be able to talk to the necessary people in CAMS to improve that situation. But at the moment it is a case of trying to advocate on a case-by-case basis.
Could I just say, just sort of similar point and on the same subject, but is there any family therapies available to families that you've had adopted into?
Yeah, so through the Adoption Support Fund, we are able to provide funding for every adoptive family who needs it, which is fantastic. And the type of therapy can be decided according to their need, and that can include family therapy. So they're able to access up to £5,000 worth of therapy per year, and that comes through our service. So that is an incredible resource for our families and really preventative. The difficulty comes when there is a much higher level of sort of verging on clinical needs, and that's when we really need CAMS involvement, and that sort of support that we can provide isn't quite enough. But in terms of the preventative and ongoing support, it's fantastic that we have that resource funded by government.
Helen, and then I'll go to colleagues who join us through Teams.
Thanks. It's really nice, Lydia, to read this because I was the lead member here when we took the decision to enter into the consortium agreement. So it's really, really nice to be able to know that it's starting to, it feels like from reading the report that it's starting to work very well, and as it was intended to. I think someone maybe isn't muted. Maybe they are now. So my question was really, well, firstly, the comment on CAMS. I wonder, Zena, should we invite CAMS locally to come to our committee just to talk to them about the needs of our young people?
Are you asking me a question? Sorry.
Bev said yes, please.
I was about to say yes. Do you want to know for a minute? But I was going to follow that up with a question. So if I could just interject now, I think that I would like to follow up from Ellen about whether that would be helpful for the local authorities to bring this up with health through the Health and Wellbeing Board and an integrated care, if anybody can understand it, arrangements through North London, because these are clearly, as Krista said, a high priority group. So sorry, that was just to interject that.
No, it'd be good though, wouldn't it, to have them here? So my question was, sorry Lydia, that was a digression. In terms of the family finding referrals and the number of matches, Haringey, it seems that we've got comparatively quite high referrals and quite high matches. So I wonder if you could just say a little bit about what's behind that. I mean, presumably that's a good thing. So or maybe it isn't, I don't know. But I'd like just to understand sort of what you think might be behind that. And I don't know whether Bev or anybody else might want to jump in later.
Yeah, I'm sure Bev might give more context in terms of the local picture, but I think Haringey traditionally has always had relatively higher numbers of adoptions compared to the other North London boroughs, and so this is what we look at really is a consistency, and then if there's a change, either significantly higher or significantly lower, what might be causing that and what might be happening. Part of the difference when you're comparing the figures is also in the population sizes in the boroughs and the type of populations that are living in those areas. So many of these boroughs may not be statistically equivalent sort of to yourselves in terms of those factors which affects that level. Yeah, but Bev may be able to add more for the local context.
Do you want to comment?
I'm happy to, and then I think it might also be helpful just for the record to send a more detailed note on the profile of the number of the factors leading to children being decision being made for permanency through adoption. Can you hear me still? I mean, some of the experiences of Haringey really relate to the numbers of single parents where there are a combination of challenges in terms of their use of substances, mental health difficulties and experience of domestic abuse. We have a number of our mums, sadly, that although we have the pause in place and it has had a significant impact, it's our view that the numbers would be greater, but they are the lack of stability and their mobility across the Haringey means that those are often the parents that we re-engage, and we're still seeing a small cluster of those parents present where needing us to take immediate intervention on the birth of the baby. We also have a number of children with a toxic trio in place, where supporting the parents to engage earlier in any intervention and mental health support needs and substance misuse services has been very challenging. And what we know is where we are able to work with them to engage them, their success rates are high and the prospects are high, but typically we don't have strong family networks in terms of a family unit that can help bring their influence to bear. So I think a separate note from me, just spelling that out in clearer terms would be helpful, but just to give you a flavour of some of the challenges that we're having with the types of children, sadly, that come up for adoption.
Any more? Marsha, anything you want to raise?
No, thank you.
Ahmed? Ahmed, you there? I have a couple of questions or two, Lydia. The first one is about what you think the impact of the cost of living crisis might be on people who would like to adopt, who are fostering, because of course we pay people to foster, and they may want to adopt, but they may not be able to afford to adopt. So I'd just be interested on what you think of the trends and so on, because it's sort of touched on in the report, but you know, there's a lot more underneath that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people who foster normally continue to foster. Some adopt. People who come into adoption, normally they have to meet a certain financial threshold, sort of stability threshold at the beginning. And this has always been a challenge in London, especially with housing sizes, because normally we need them to have a spare bedroom and adequate space in their home. And as you know, many people don't have that in London. So I think that we would expect to see the cost of living crisis having an impact on people who maybe would have been just about in the position to come forward, may start to feel that they are actually too economically vulnerable to do that. I think that it will have a sort of less immediate effect than it might do with fostering, and it may take longer for us to see that, but it will have an effect. And one of the things that we are already looking and wanting to pilot within the Black Adoption Project particularly is how we can find a way to provide more targeted financial support and assistance at an early stage when people come in looking to adopt, in order to overcome some of the economic barriers. So people who would be really good at adopting, but they just need a little bit more financial stability. If they had an allowance in place, for example, if we knew that they would have an allowance in place, would that be enough to mean that they could go on to adopt? And we're hoping to be able to pilot that through that project. So we will be exploring areas, but also watching the situation. We don't want people to feel that we don't want people to not be able to adopt because they're not wealthy. We want everybody who could look after a child to be able to adopt, and that's the challenge.
I mean, the housing situation must impact enormously. I'm just curious on whether there are any thoughts, or I don't know who you deal with at the national level around adoption, on how there may be some move to try and facilitate adoption in communities where people may not be able to buy houses or have stable houses, but who actually would be really good adopters. You know, people who come through your screening process, you know, the recruitment process. Are there any such forums nationally?
One of the things that we would be interested in seeing is whether we can learn from some of the work that's been done with foster care. Some local authorities have been able to allocate housing for foster carers to increase their property size. One of the reasons why this is harder to do in adoption is because our adopters come in without having a child identified to them. And at the beginning, we don't know if they're going to go on to actually be successfully approved. So we're having to make sort of financial commitments to them that we don't know whether they will actually go on to be able to care for a child. And that's one of the complicating factors with that. But we do have people approach us who are living in housing association properties, social housing, and one of the difficulties they face is that they're told that they would not be able to increase their property size until a child is already living with them. So even if they're approved as an adopter and looking for a child, they're often told they can't be considered until they're overcrowded. And that's something we definitely could look at and try to focus on in order to increase accessibility. Nationally, I'm sure there are many inner city areas that have similar challenges, but definitely within London, this is a bigger issue for us than it is across the country.
The question is, how impacted have you been by the delays in the courts?
Particularly the adoption orders have been very impacted. There was a time at the beginning of the pandemic when the courts didn't want to make the adoption orders because they couldn't be reassured that the birth parents would be able to participate in virtual hearings. So there was a big knock-on effect with those. And then I think the other factor we've seen is particularly proceedings just taking much, much longer. So we have those children with adoption plans, but unless they're in early permanence placements, we can't begin to progress and look for families for them for a long time. So it slows down the whole process, and we know that as children get older, it's harder to move them into adoptive placement. So we're very much hopeful that that's going to begin to improve.
Selin pointed out the Haringey is a bit of an outlier in the numbers, and we've got higher numbers, so this has been a particular impact, I presume. It's really a question for Bev, really, because the council takes the court proceedings and you recruit the families, but there must be great pressure, Bev, on the services because of these delays. That's a question phrased as a comment. If you want to reply.
I mean, Councillor Brabazon, you have a vast amount of experience of the family court, so and you know when they run efficiently, even within timescales, there's a lot of pressure. When their proceedings are delayed because of COVID, and of course the workforce is experiencing the impact of COVID too, the two compounded does create challenges for us, and we are. We try to respond to those challenges as best we can, but we are now moving to a more strategic operating model with a clear focus on adoption, so that to minimise the disruptions, because there are a number of parties involved, not just the courts, but Adopt North London, the prospective foster carers, and so we do need a really efficient. A level of efficiency that we have to gear up to ensure that any of those issues that aggravate delays, that we move to a mitigation of delays approach.
It's quite a practical question that's just occurred to me after, Lydia, you mentioned about possible allowances and so on. If there's an early permanence arrangement in place, and so the prospective adopters are fostering until the adoption is confirmed, do those parents receive the fostering allowance?
Yes, they do. They receive the fostering allowance throughout the time that they foster the child, and also they have access to statutory maternity pay and adoption pay and adoption leave from their employer as well. So it really is a fantastic scheme and works very, very effectively for children. Much harder for the prospective parents because there's uncertainty involved, but we've seen more and more interest and willingness to consider early permanency. So we have a working group at the moment, a project focusing on improving the awareness of early permanency in the early services. We need social workers right at the beginning of the process who are considering taking children into care or who are working with pregnant mothers where that might be a possibility, to identify those and refer them to us. So we've got a project going this year to try to improve awareness. It can work very effectively for children.
And so, given that you're talking about looking into the possibility of allowances for those families that might not quite be sufficiently financially stable according to the thresholds and so on, were they to enter into an early permanence arrangement, would that bring them into that stability? So I suppose it strikes me that there's already an existing mechanism for the things you were talking about in terms of helping a number of families to qualify as prospective adoptive parents, if it can be made to work, as you said.
Yeah, so as well as those allowances, we do have existing adoption allowances. So some families receive them based on the needs of the child or based on their own circumstances, and they can receive them ongoing until the child is an adult. But the difficulty we have with both those types of allowances is that they normally attach to the child. So we approve the adopter, and then at the point that we match them with the child, we decide on the allowance. And what we need to do is to be able to approve these parents who are not as economically stable is attach an allowance to them at the beginning before we know about the child, and guarantee and assess them on the basis that they will have that allowance and therefore they will be able to adopt. And that's the sort of change in practice that we want to try to pilot. It's something that we think, within North London, we have all our boroughs are very sort of committed to this kind of approach, that we should be able to try to pilot and see whether it's effective or not.
Question from me. How long is the assessment process taking now?
It is taking, so it's meant to take 6 months is sort of we say is the minimum of part of the process. The stage 1 process, which is the checks part of the process, is taking much, much longer and has reduced from some of the worst delays we saw in the pandemic. For example, especially GP, health medicals and getting appointments for that. So we now find the stage 1 process will take around 4 months to complete, and the stage 2 part of the process around 5 months, so around 9 months in total. But within that, we also have adopters who need much longer, who take breaks for counselling support when needs are identified and things like that along the way.
Any more questions for anybody? That was a very, very interesting report, and thank you very much. Really well put together and gives us a really good overview, and of course, like everything, raises more questions than it answers. And Bev has her hand up.
Sorry, Councillor Brabazon. I just want to make sure that my attempt to say I'm supportive of Councillor Weston's suggestion to bring CAMS here is formally recorded and we don't lose it as an action in this meeting.
Can I just say, that is the second time I've heard that, but I never got the councillor's name, even though I've heard it twice now. Oh, it's...
Can we also record, well, the other suggestion linked to this, which I saw you nod at, Bev, which is that and Lydia did, I think also, that this comes up at the Wellbeing Board somewhere in the integrated care arrangements, I keep forgetting what it's all called, in North London, where I think everybody has to fight their corner for resources. So that's the place to go. That's where the money is decided. I think it's a big, big issue, isn't it? The most vulnerable children and supporting the families. Can I thank you ever so much for coming. I'm sorry you had to wait a while.
Thank you very much indeed for having me, and happy to come back and answer questions anytime.
We'll take you up on that. That brings us to agenda item 8, which is Lynn's report, which is, I have to say, the shortest report I have ever seen in local government. Well done, Lynn.
Thank you. I just want to check that people can hear me now, because I think before it was echoing. Are you able to hear me? Yeah, you are. Okay. So following on from the last committee meeting where I informed committee with regards to the delay in the reports being uploaded, we've taken a number of steps to ensure that that doesn't happen now. And one of the steps we've taken is to prepare recommendations after a child's health assessment. So a doctor would see a child for an initial health assessment, and within 48 hours, we've asked for the report to be made available with recommendations and uploaded to Mosaic. So it's available for the social worker and the independent reviewing officer in a timely fashion. Just to explain that the delay that occurs is often because of the doctors who are seeing the children aren't just working within our community children in care paediatric team, but they're also working in other hospitals as well. And before there was a delay of them writing the reports. So we've put that into action now, and we're uploading them within 48 hours. There is a process where it's going to be audited. It should have been done last week, but unfortunately I was off with COVID, so I'm planning on doing that this week. And we're also expecting the nurses with their review health assessments, and the doctors that are doing review health assessments are also uploading recommendations within 48 hours. And then the reports will be uploaded in full and distributed when they've been completed. And so just if there's any questions.
Any questions? It's quite straightforward. Any questions from Ellen? I'm so pleased.
It's a quick one, Lynn. Thanks for this.
Yes.
It's really reassuring to know the systems have been put in place. Like, it's nice to have that sort of feedback loop closed, actually, because we were all concerned last time, and I know that you shared that. It was just a quick question on the full health report. Has there been agreed any timeframes for uploading and completing the full health report? Because I completely understand why the recommendations and actions are done quickly so they don't get lost. But obviously then I suppose the risk is that the full health report slips to the bottom of the pile. So have you got any timescales involved for just completing the records, basically?
They should be uploaded within, completed and uploaded within 2 weeks, but I have to say that isn't happening. With the nurses' reports, we've got long-term sickness within the nursing team, and we're struggling to complete reports. And the doctors have just started. The new doctors have started in September. And they should again be uploaded within 2 weeks. But at the moment, we're not meeting that. One of the reasons we're not is, as you're aware, we don't have currently a named doctor for children in care. We've recruited into the position, which is good news. So that doctor will then be able to approve the reports. But at the moment, it's the community paediatric medical team who are working with the paediatricians that are doing the assessments and approving those reports, which is why there is a greater delay than there was previously. But the timescale should be 2 weeks, but we're not meeting it.
Any more questions from either the virtual colleagues or Krista, Ellen? Thanks ever so much, Lynn, and perhaps you'll just give us a final update when it stabilises and that we know it's meeting the timescale.
Yes, thank you.
Is that okay? Any comments from the officers, Ben?
My only Councillor Brabazon, that I know that Lynn has really got hold of this. She's been meeting with us individually met a couple of times with myself as the AD to just go through the process we're going to follow. I think that we're just going to continue the conversations around getting the designated doctor settled back into position. And so the next time I think that Lynn comes, it might be helpful if we ask some senior people to come and talk to, some of the challenges around recruiting to that post.
That's excellent. We're getting a very, very long agenda for our next meeting. Ellen is suggesting a health-themed meeting. I was thinking about the next agenda, but we'll discuss that separately. That brings us to the end of the reports, and actually we've come up to any other business, I think. And I beg your pardon. No, well, I'm right. I did want to talk just briefly about the champions work, because I did write to members of the committee, and I know Ellen, I think, has replied, and Cressida setting out their preferences. And so really, Bev, I just wanted to know when we might move forward with some of the training and development so that we actually get it underway. I will chase the other committee members. I think I might need to talk to Ellen about some of that, but those who I'm getting a feel who's really committed here. Yeah.
Thanks, Councillor Brabazon. So the training is ready to be rolled out as soon as we can coordinate the dates in the diary. I am recommending that we try and do the first programme of training between after the half term and the second week in December, and then they will consist of an hour-and-a-half session for 3 of the modules. Then in the new year we repeat the same format but do the final set of training for January and before we get to Valentine's Day. And then I think we should organise a launch for early March, ready for us to start working in earnest on the champions model for the new financial year.
That fit with everybody? I think what we need to do is get full responses from the other members. I think 2 of the slots are now taken from Ellen and Cressida, and so we need to chase our other committee members on areas, or else perhaps to assign them. So I'm hoping we've got members here tonight and see what an interesting area of work this is, and the role in this is really important. We have to build up our member engagement in this area, and I'm really pleased that people are so enthused.
So, Councillor Brabazon, tomorrow you are with us to do the training to the wider members and ward councillors on safeguarding. Weaved in that training programme is another advert for people to consider corporate parenting. So, and at that point, I'll pass you the mic to try and encourage people to be more involved in this important piece of this important work. But if there are expressions of interest already, it would be, I think, if we could start to share them with myself and the team, so that we can start to now through Jude match young people who will be your the advisors to you, and also to start to do the introductions with your subject expert people, so in advance of the training you at least know who you're matched to.
That's it. Marsha, you look like you want to say something.
I do apologise. I was just checking the areas again because I am very keen, and I'm so sorry that I've been a bit sort of behind on emailing, but I will do better. So I was literally just in the background looking at the document again.
You send an email to myself and copy in Bev and everybody, that would be good, and then I need to go back and check it all, and I'll liaise with you, Bev, if we have a chance maybe tomorrow to have a word. Okay, so this is all moving along really good. Unless there's anything else, then I think everybody's going to have an early night. So can I thank everybody for coming to the meeting and for contributing and for supporting the young people who came from Aspire, and I hope that you found it a useful meeting, helpful meeting. Thank you. And close the meeting now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good night. Thank you.